Angel Meckling, and sometimes I'm more known as Malaka Thalimi. And I became Malaka Thalimi when I became a Muslim when I was 11. But you know, my journey to Islam wasn't, I guess, at 11. My journey to Islam was much further back. I would say I started to become a Muslim when I was a child, which a lot of people would think, how is that possible? But I was raised without a family. I was raised in foster care, and I don't know if you know what that is, but it's sort of like when you don't have a family, the government steps in and takes control of your life. And that happened to me when I was born. And in Pennsylvania, where I was from, they have this rule where they move you every 6 months. And so I moved my whole life every 6 months, experiencing different backgrounds and families and people. And through all of that, I was a Christian, then I was Buddhist, then I was Jehovah's Witness, so my sense of God was always changing. And I decided, probably about when I was 8 years old, that I would define who God was for me. And I started seeking out God. And I started reading religious books. And I had read the Bible several times. And my issue with the Bible was that it didn't always make sense. And if it didn't make sense to me, and I was only 8, 9 years old, how could it be from God? So I always had the sense that God was real, but I didn't exactly understand how God existed or what God was. But I spent a lot of time praying, and I spent a lot of time at night alone in my window looking up at the sky, thinking God was out there somewhere. And I hoped that he would hear me. And I spent a lot of time praying for a family and for someone to want me and to be wanted and to be loved. And about that time, I had met my birth family. And when I met them, some of them were Christian, but my mom was a satanic worshiper, and my father was atheist. And I was completely taken aback because my life was so religious at that point that I would run away from my mother and go to church and seek out God. And my mom was very much against that. And somehow I ended up back in foster care from abuses of my mother. And I had a foster parent who had been sort of part of my family for a while. And she was going out of town. And the rule is, if you're leaving the state, you can't take a foster child with you. So yet again, I had another foster parent for a weekend this time. And that foster parent was American. Her husband was Kuwaiti, and they were Muslim. And before I went, I was warned that he probably beat his wife, and they had to sleep in bathtubs because they were Arab, and they rode camels if they were back home. And I was scared out of my mind. It was like the scariest thought that I was going to this Muslim's house. And I remember in tears as we drove, and she kept telling me, there's nowhere else for you to go, you have to go. And when I got there, it was more weird in the sense that I'd never seen a family so happy. They smiled and they laughed and they played, and he was involved with his children, and I had never seen a father playing on the floor with kids. And I'd never seen a mom who wasn't screaming all the time. And they took me to the movies and called my worker, and they wanted to take me skiing in the mountains. But I guess for liability, they weren't allowed. But I remember him on the phone, like arguing with them. I just want to take her out. I want to have fun. And I thought, no one's ever argued for me before. No one's ever wanted to do those things. So I asked them, what is Islam? What is this religion? Why are you like this? And she basically said that you're too young. If I were to teach you Islam and you didn't accept it, it would be worse than if I taught it to you and, you just walked away. And I didn't understand that because I wanted to know. I wanted to know why she was so weird and why she was so wonderful at the same time. So I started collecting things from what she had said. Like, she kept saying, inshallah, this will happen. And I was like, what is that word, inshallah? And she explained, if God is willing. And I thought, you're going to ask God if you could do something. And that was ingenious to me. And I got the word yalla, and it was just, come on. And I went home and after that weekend, and I wrote everything I'd learned on a piece of paper. God is only one, and Jesus is not the Son of God, but he's a prophet. And there's another prophet named Muhammad. And I wrote down the 3 Arabic words I had learned. And I wrote it all down, and I folded it up, and I tucked it in my Bible. And I thought, this is really special, and one day I'm going to learn something from it. Because as a Christian child, everything special goes in your Bible. Well, my life at the time had taken a turn, and I ended up back in the home of my father, who I hadn't known my whole life. He was in prison my whole life, and I had just met him a couple of months before, and here I was living in his house. And I was babysitting my sister one day, and she got upset and she overdosed. And she had taken all of the medication she could find, and she went to sleep. And I tried to wake her up, and she wouldn't wake up. And so they took her by ambulance to the hospital. And my mom said, "That's all your fault. You've killed your sister." And I couldn't live with that. I couldn't live with the fact that I had killed her. And even though she wasn't dead, she was in a coma, I had felt like I did that. So I took every pill that was in the house that day, and I went to sleep. And my mother returned a couple hours later and tried to wake me, and she couldn't. And I was in a coma for 3 days. And they had told my mother that she should start planning my funeral, that I wasn't going to make it. And while I was out, I had this dream that I was walking through this beautiful garden, and I sat down next to a river, and a voice said to me, "Follow what's in your Bible." And then I woke up. And when I woke up, there was no medication in my system. And I asked my aunt, I said, "I need you to go get my Bible." And she was just stunned that I was even awake. And she's like, I don't understand. I said, "I need my Bible. I need it now." And I started screaming at her. And she left the hospital, and she went and she got my Bible. And I just needed to talk with God at that moment. And so I opened my Bible, and a paper fell out. And it was everything I had ever learned about Islam. And I knew that that's what the dream had talked about. And I decided at that moment that I would find out about Islam, that I was supposed to be Muslim. So I went to live with my grandmother, my father's mother, when I got out of the hospital. And I went to the library, and I wanted to take out books on Islam, but I didn't have a library card, so I stole them. I was a young juvenile delinquent, didn't have really any sense of right and wrong, and I took the Quran, and I took a couple of Islamic books, and I went home and I started reading. And I guess it's funny that I stole the Quran, but I have replaced it since. But I read the Quran for the first time, actually, in the bathtub, which is also sort of weird to be reading the Quran, but it was a secret place, and it was a quiet place, and it was a place where I could be alone. And I read through the whole thing in a couple of hours, and I was in tears. And I had found all of the prophets that I had loved in the Bible, but they were different. They were loving, and they didn't sin, and it made sense. And these people were role models, and Moses and Noah and all of these people that I had loved my whole life were explained in the Quran. And I knew that this was a book of God. And so I went to school, and I happened to be at the only high school that had an ESL program. So there were a handful of girls with scarves, I want to say 4 or 5. And they were in the ESL classrooms. So they weren't in my classrooms, but I started seeking them out. And I would yell across the cafeteria, "Assalamu alaikum," hoping they would stop. But they had been discriminated so much that they ran. And I kept trying, and they thought for sure that I was just trying to torture them or bother them. But eventually one stopped. And we had a conversation. I said, "I need to know about Islam. Can you teach me Arabic? I want to read the Quran in Arabic. I've read it in English." And she's like, "Okay." So we sat every day before class learning Arabic, learning the alphabet and learning simple words. And I still can't speak Arabic, but I was trying really hard. And I decided, I would take Shahada and I would become Muslim. But I was worried. Yeah, I had just found my family. I hadn't been with my family my whole life. You know, would they accept me? Would they want me? And I went and spoke with my aunt and said, you know, I've decided to become Muslim. Would that be okay? And she said, we loved you your whole life. We waited for you your whole life. Of course, if you become Muslim, we would accept you. And I was elated. And I went in the next day and I told my grandmother, you know, I've decided to be Muslim. And my whole world came crashing down. I was told that this wasn't a religion of God, that it wasn't white, and I was a white child, and I would be dishonoring my race, I would be dishonoring my family. I was called a sand nigger. I was told that I didn't belong in my family, and this was not something that they could accept and not something that they wanted. And I cried, and I said, but I'm only trying to follow God. I've been waiting my whole life, and I know this is what I'm supposed to do. Would you just listen to me? And she said, no. And she said, as long as you choose to live in this house, you're not going to be Muslim. And in my heart, I knew I was right. But the risk of losing my family was so great, I couldn't let them know that I was still going to be Muslim. So I went into hiding. And my grandmother cooked pork every day to make sure that I would eat it. And I fed it to the dog when she wasn't looking. And I stayed at night and I took a piece of material and I sewed a scarf. And I would ride my bike and get about a block away from home and put my scarf on and continue on my way. And it was during Easter break from school, so I didn't have school to worry about. And I had some Iraqi friends who I'd met in school, and I started going to their houses to find out more. And I found that they accepted me and they liked me. And I found something wonderful. I found a community. But then school came along, and I decided that first day when school came back from break that I would wear my scarf to school. And I put on the only skirt that I had and the only long sleeve shirt, because I just realized that you can't wear shorts in a short sleeve shirt and a scarf. My friends had told me, which is what I had been wearing. And I put on Islamic clothing and my scarf, and I went to school. And I was so proud of myself. And that first day, I walked in the door and I walked past the vice principal, who grabbed me by my arm and pulled me into her office and demanded to know what was on my head. And I said, I'm Muslim now, and this is my scarf. And she ripped it off my head and said, no, that's a hat, there's policies. And I said, but there's other girls that wear a scarf. And I started to name them. And she said, but they need special written permission from their families to break the hat rule. And she called my grandmother. And my grandmother screamed at me on the phone and said, don't come back. You're not welcome here. And you're leaving. And she called my worker, and she would deal with me when I got home. And I walked out of school that day with my scarf in my hand, not on my head, in tears, knowing that my whole world had just fallen apart. And I went home to my grandmother, and I had hoped to just apologize, and I didn't mean to go against her, but I felt I had to be Muslim. It wasn't a choice at that point. And when I got home, she met me at the door and she said, I've called your worker. You're leaving in the morning. You can either pack your things and leave now, or you can wait for him in the morning. And I grabbed my Quran, and I grabbed my scarf and a photo album, and I walked out of her house. And I went to a friend of mine who was Iraqi down the street to say goodbye, because I figured I would be gone. I had a placement set up that if it didn't work with my family, I would be locked up until I was 21, because I had aged out of the system. There were no more foster homes to send me to, and I had no more family that wanted me. So I just went to say goodbye. And when I sat down with them, they said, you're being locked up because you're Muslim? And I said, sort of, not exactly because I'm Muslim. It's more because I don't have family, but I don't have family because I'm Muslim. So yeah. And they said, this can't happen. and there's got to be something we can do. And I said, there's not, in my family, they would never allow me to stay, and I have nowhere else to go. So they called a imam from here in Michigan, and they told him my situation, and he said, well, bring her to Michigan, and he would hide me. And so I stayed that night, and the next day there was supposed to be a lady that came. She was from London, her husband was from Iran, and they were going to drive me to Michigan. And they were all sitting, and the women were in the back of the house, and the guys were in the front having tea, and they were talking about my situation, and there was a knock on the door. It was the police. They were there because there was only a few friends that I had in the neighborhood, and they suspected that's where I was. And my friend's father let him in, and my worker sat in the front with a male police officer drinking tea, and he came back into the back room, my friend's father, and said, they just want to talk with you. They're not going to take you, it's just a conversation. And we knew darn well they were going to take me, they were just saying that to him. And so this friend who was British, who I don't know until now what her name was, but she told them, go ahead, let me get her ready and we'll send her out. So her father went to the front to drink tea and tell them that we were coming, and she shoved me out the back door. She said, run. And I said, where am I going to go? And she ripped my scarf off my head and said, it's not safe for you to wear that right now. Run to this other family's house. And so I did. I ran the 2.5 blocks to this other Iraqi family's house. And they were scared. The police had already been there. And they said, you can't stay here. They were already here. Go to this other house. So I ran to the other house. When I got there, it was a close friend of mine now. Her mother was there alone, and she didn't speak any English, and she didn't quite understand what was going on, but she invited me in, and I didn't have enough Arabic to explain to her what was going on either. So I stayed there for about an hour until there was a knock on the door, and it was the British lady and her husband. And they said, we're going to drive you to New York instead, because we need to get back quickly. And the border to New York was much closer than the border to Michigan. And so they did. They laid me in the back seat, they covered me up with a blanket, and drove me over the state line. And when we got to New York, we stopped at a mosque that they had known there, and she explained the situation to one of the American converts there. And she said, you can't tell anybody what's really going on. This is your sister, and you need her to get to your mother, who's in Michigan, and just ask them to put her on a Greyhound. And she handed me another Quran, because I had to leave everything back in Pennsylvania when I ran. And she said, if you have nothing in the world, but you have this book, you have everything. And so I took that Quran, and I spent the night in the mosque. And the next day they put me on a bus, and I read the whole way here. And when I got here, there was an American lady that came and picked me up at the bus stop. And I stayed with her for a couple of months, and it was wonderful. I read every day. I walked to the mosque that was on Warren Avenue, and I prayed every day, and I was finally becoming who I always wanted to be. And then I swallowed a pin, a hijab pin. I had held it in my mouth while I was putting it on, and I swallowed it. This was maybe 6 months after I had initially ran, and she was out of town at the time, and she's like, I think you'll be okay. And then the more people I called, they're like, no, you're going to need surgery. If you swallow a pin, it could kill you. So I went into the hospital and explained that I had swallowed a pin, gave them a fake name, told them that I was Malak Mashamish, and I was Lebanese, and my parents were in Lebanon, and I was here alone, and I had swallowed a pin. So of course I was admitted. I had surgery a couple days later, but the night before I had surgery, I called my great-grandmother, and I said, Grandma, I'm in Michigan, and I swallowed a pin, and I'm so scared. I'm supposed to have surgery in the morning. I don't know what to do. And she said, just tell them who you are. You can come and stay with me if they'll let me. I'll fight with your worker and we'll try to get you to come here, but just tell them who you are. And so I did. And when I got out of the hospital, I was arrested and I was taken to a juvenile detention center here, where I stayed for 3 months while they were working with how to ship me back to Pennsylvania. I was ridiculed, I was beaten because I was a Muslim runaway. Then I was taken in handcuffs to a plane. I was handcuffed until we actually entered the plane. They were removed and then put back on when the plane landed. I was arrested at the airport and I was locked up in juvenile detention in Pennsylvania. And I was taken in by the FBI and I spent hours sitting with them. They wanted to know who helped me, who transported me across the border, who had I stayed with. They knew names. They started naming every single person that had helped me, and I denied it. And they said, but who helped you? And I said, Allah. And I repeated Allah for hours. And they threatened me that if I didn't tell them who, that I would be locked up the rest of my life. And I said that was okay. Allah helped me. And somehow I made it through that, and I was in a cell, alone, in solitary. And I was stripped of my clothing and my belongings, and I guess they were trying to scare me or intimidate me. And when I was there, I spent my whole time in sujood and asking Allah for help. And, you know, remembering the story of Imam Hussein and what they did to his family, and hoping that I would have the strength of Sayyida Zainab and have the strength to get through this, and thinking of myself in the prison cell, and remembering his family in the prison cell, and asking for help. It's hard when you're sitting alone and scared and no one's around, and remembering that you're not alone, that Allah has been there your whole life, and knowing that the family of Imam Hussein lived through it too. I had the strength to live through it. And I had the strength to remember that Allah has always been with me and would always be with me, and I could make it through. And 3 days later, there was a man that came to my cell that explained that the judge had released my case, that my great-grandmother had agreed to take me, and she was taking custody, and I was released without anything else. It was just like the doors were open and I was free to go. And I went to my grandmother and I told my grandmother, Grandma, you know I gotta go back, right? And she's like, I know, I just couldn't leave you there. And I thanked her and I kissed her and we talked about Islam and Christianity, and she said, I know, you know, if I wasn't the age I am, I would be Muslim. Your strength has shown me that God must be real in Islam, because no one could go through that. And I came back to Michigan and I stayed with friends, and I was back and forth until I was about 14 years old. And when I turned 14, I went back with my family for a little bit and came back here for a little bit longer until I was 16. And when I was 16, I contacted the imam that had helped me in the beginning, and I said, I'm ready to get married and I'm going to trust whoever you bring. And I felt like I needed to go to him because at that time it was in the nights of Muharram, and it was in the beginning of Muharram. And every night I was approached by people in the community. I have a son, I have a brother, I have all of these offers of marriage. I had 11 in a week, and I was starting to feel very overwhelmed because I had never thought about marrying and never thought about men per se. I mean, it was always about me and Allah. And I realized that it was time to choose a husband, and I wasn't in a place, I didn't have a family to do that. And so I did go to the imam and I said, whoever you choose is who I'll agree to marry. And he brought my husband. and we met twice. We talked on the phone twice. And the funny thing is, I never looked at his face. I kept my eyes down the whole time, and I looked at my feet and my hands, and I was extremely nervous because we were meeting for the purpose of marriage. And the second time we talked on the phone, he said, I'm coming tomorrow to make the akad. And I said, okay. So I guess that was the equivalent of asking me to marry him. And so we had gotten married within a week. And we had a simple ceremony in my friend's living room. The imam and 2 witnesses that were girls, and I think 4 or 5 guys. And we went out to a restaurant, and that was my wedding. And we had spoke, would we have a big wedding? And I said, I wanted my family to be there, and they would never accept me. And he's like, I want my family to be there too, but they're in Iraq. And I'm here alone too. And he had just had some brothers. And so for us, we decided that it was me, him, and Allah. And that was the perfect way to start my life, I think. And I've been married now for 17 years and have 6 beautiful children. And you would think that everything is okay now. And I would tend to agree. Allah has replaced what I lost with something that was so much better. He gave me a family, but I still long and still want acceptance from my family. And I've tried to contact them several times. And I realize that when I went back these last couple times, that Allah protected me from them. My family still smokes marijuana and drinks on a regular basis, and they live in a way I would never want my children to see. We pulled up to my mom's house last time, and my kids said, are you sure this is a house? This looks like a shack. Do we really have to go in there? And we knocked on the door, and there's cardboard on the windows, and it smells bad, and their priorities are so different. Their goals in life are so different. And that could have been me, but it's not. Allah replaced everything that I had lost. All the family that I had ever searched for was something so much better. So it's nice. When I became Muslim, I gained a community of people. I was always told that Muslims would never accept you, Muslims would never want you. It takes years to get in the Muslim community, I was told. And it didn't for me. I always found love with every Muslim I'd encountered, and it's strange how different life has become for me. When I had first gotten to Michigan, I didn't know that Islam was divided. I thought that Muslims followed the Quran and that was the end of the story. And when I got here, I was asked, are you Shia or are you Sunni? And I said, what? Am I what or am I what? Islam being divided was a thought that had never occurred to me because Allah had made all of the decisions for me to become Muslim. So how could I possibly decide? And the imam that brought me to Michigan sat down with me in the mosque, and I asked him, I said, what is Shia, what is Sunni? And why is it so important for me to decide? And he said, well, let me explain it to you like this. After our Prophet died, not everybody agreed with who was in charge. And there are some people that stayed with his family, and there are some people that went off with his friends. And that's how Islam originally divided. And I said, but wait, wouldn't his family know him best? Weren't these the people that he loved most? Weren't these his people? Who are friends when you look at family? And the Imam smiled at me and he said, that's exactly the point. And at that point, I realized that Shia wasn't a choice for me. It just always was. I had searched for family. I had searched for love. And of course, the people that our perfect prophet, who I had known was sinless, would have a perfect family. And so being Sunni was never an option for me. It was always being Shia and always loving his family. And at a certain point, I started studying who are these people, who are his family. And when I started reading their stories, I realized they were almost like the prophets in the Quran. They were almost like the prophets in Christianity, and that their life wasn't easy. Their life wasn't just given to them. It wasn't like a monarch who had, children who were raised with a silver spoon in their mouth. Instead, these people struggled for Islam. They laid their life down for Islam. And I realized that these were role models set for me. You know, these were people that I could understand. They were human. They had been through life that was given to them that was more than any person should have to bear. And they gave me strength. To know that each of them died, one after another, fighting for Islam, made me realize that nothing in this life mattered, that only that quest to find Allah and only that quest for the truth mattered, and made everything else so much easier. For me, it didn't matter if my family didn't want me anymore. It didn't matter if I was beaten or abused or killed. I was okay with that because they had already set the mold. They had already walked the steps that I was trying to walk. And, you know, from all of the Imams, the one that always stood out for me was Imam Hussein. And the story of him standing and telling his people that tomorrow we're going to walk into the desert and we're not going to come back. Will you walk with me? And it's okay if you don't. And knowing that he really would have been okay if all of his family and friends had walked away. He would not have blamed them. But instead, they walked out of love. They did the impossible out of love. And that gave me a sense of purpose. I knew that if you truly love Allah, if you truly have a relationship with Allah, you can walk into battle. You can walk through anything in life. And that's something that was missing my whole life. It was a purpose. And then I read Tears and Tributes. And it goes much more deeply into the story of the women of the house and their scarves being ripped off and earrings being ripped out of ears and bleeding and pain and humiliation, and realized that I was going through that. And I had gone through so much in my life, but it was nothing compared to what they went through. It's nothing compared to watching your family members die in front of your face one at a time. And if they had the strength to get through with pride, with determination, with, you know, Sayyidah Zainab, peace be upon her, head held high, you know, talking to the high courts, demanding her rights. If she had the strength to do that, then I could have the strength to do anything. So for me, being Shia or being Sunni was never an option. Once you know Ahl al-Bayt, once you have that relationship with Allah, and you know who Allah loved, you can't love anyone else. You can't choose anything else. There's not an option of studying, you know, should I put my hands down or should I put my hands up? How do I make dua? How do I pray? How do I live my life? And does that really matter? It didn't. None of those things actually mattered. What matters is your relationships, your one-on-one relationship with Allah. And, you know, it's funny, a lot of people tell me that because I'm Shia, I must put Ahl al-Bayt first. And for me, I never separate Ahl al-Bayt from Allah. You know, Ahl al-Bayt to me is someone, something, some belief, some ability for myself. You can't base your life off of a prophet. You can't hope to achieve prophethood because you're not a prophet. You can't hope to be perfect like them because they're prophets. But Ahl al-Bayt wasn't divined by Allah as a prophet. They were given the role as leaders and guides, someone that we could base our life off of, someone that was human, someone that has all the things that you are given at birth, but they chose better. And it's that choice that was important to me. They are not perfect because Allah made them perfect. They're perfect because they chose to be perfect, and Allah protected them because of their choice. And I think that really matters to me, because in life, you make choices every day. You make choices about what you'll believe and what you won't believe, and you can choose to follow Allah through anything. And Ahl al-Bayt really showed that to me. And it's not about details. It's not about deciding what's right and what's wrong, and in history, which historian got it correct and which hadith is correct. I don't think any of that matters to me as much as it matters that I know Ahl al-Bayt did these things so that I would have someone to look forward to, that I would have hope, that Islam would remain perfect so that my children would have a perfect relationship with Allah and have a perfect book to follow and know what Allah wanted us to know. And that's what's really important, that they cared so much about preserving the beauty in Islam. They gave their life. And to me, you couldn't ask for anything more. Imam Mahdi has always been someone that I enjoy. And it's funny to say that, you know. Out of all respect, I enjoy the idea of Imam Mahdi. He was a child when he was taken. And it gives you that sense of mystery in Islam. It gives you that sense of excitement in Islam, and knowing that at any time he can come back. And at any time he can take this world and change it into what it is, into what it's supposed to be. And it gives you hope to go each day and know that there's a living Imam. There's someone alive that can help. And at any time he can come back and take control of your life, take control of the world's affairs, and know that everything can be perfect. It's very hard looking at the world now and looking at the state of Islam and walking down the street and seeing Muslims that are just so careless with their Islam, and raising my children in an imperfect world. But knowing that they have an Imam that is alive, that's not 10 million years ago, that maybe they might have had a story. That's what my children often say, that how could we possibly believe these stories that happened so long ago? How could it possibly be real now? How can it help me now? And Imam Mahdi gives you that hope. He is here now. You may not be able to see him, and he may not be walking on earth, but he's alive, and he's our Imam. He's our follower. He's our leader. He's the one that is guiding our lives, even if he's not right next to us. So Imam Mahdi to me is hope. It's a choice to be part of something greater than ourselves. We often hear about Imam Mahdi's army, and would we be willing to march into battle with Imam Mahdi? And I don't think the choice is would we be willing, is would he accept me? Am I going to be good enough? I've been willing years ago. I've been willing to die for Islam from the moment I became a Muslim. But am I making sure that I'm raising children in this world? Am I making sure that my mannerisms and my behaviorisms would be acceptable enough to be part of his army? I think that's something we all think about every day, much more than can I get to heaven, can I get to hell? Those are far away. And yeah, I think about those things, you know, am I going to make it through Judgment Day? But I also feel like Imam Mahdi will be in my day, inshallah, and I hope that he will be in my day, inshallah. So for me, Imam Mahdi's coming is much closer to my heart, because I know that at any moment this could happen. And I know that Allah is just waiting for us to be ready. Thinking about Islam and being a Muslim is what every human being is already. It's already inside of you. It's not something that you need to become, or something that is so out of reach. Allah has always been with you, will always be with you. And Allah will make the transition so much easier because of the love for Him, not because of the choices that people say around you. And you will get a lot of slack, and you will get a lot of people that don't agree with your choice, but it's not ever been about them. It's always been about your relationship with God. Islam has always been a religion of strength. Islam has always been the strongest, most powerful strength known to man. And if you trust that strength, Allah will help you through it. And I did lose my whole family. I don't have any relationship with them. But Allah replaced it with so much better. And He's been doing that throughout time. And there's not a moment that I would ever trade There's not a second that I wish didn't happen or that I could go back and change. Like, if I could go back and not tell my grandmother, would I choose to do that? Would I wait until I was older? Would I wait until the circumstance was better, where I was more equipped to handle things? No. If anything, I would have become Muslim years before, because Allah guides everyone every day, whether or not you choose to listen. So it's never been a choice to follow Islam. It's always been a choice to live your life for something greater, a choice of pure love, a choice of doing things in your life because you've been shown this is the way to do them. I never fell into a life that many Americans do, where they're drinking or dating or these things, because I've always known that God wouldn't accept that from me. I didn't need a book to tell me that. I didn't need a religion to follow to know that. I've always followed my heart, and I guess through all that I've been through, and through all of the pain, and through all of the humiliation and abuse, it's made me so much stronger. And I thank Allah for it. It's really something to thank Allah for abuse. But I'm so strong now. And I'm so much different than what I used to be. And I love much deeper than I ever loved before. And I see much clearer than I've ever seen before. And when I look at people, even people that some people say are bad Muslims or bad Christians, I don't see that anymore. I see that Allah is still working with them, and Allah is just waiting for them to open their eyes. In the Quran it does say that Allah has placed a veil over their eyes and their hearing, and I can see that now. And I guess it's so easy to just lift it off and walk and trust. And so for people that are thinking about Islam, I would say, if you've thought about it, Allah's already been working for you, and it's time to just trust that.